Everyone wants and needs their mix to be hot. Clients now demand it even if you're going to master the song later. If you're not mastering, the mix still has to be competitive when compared with other songs. This trick for a hot and loud master will not only make your mix as loud as you want it to be, but it will make it sound a whole lot better too. Okay, this trick is all about how to get a loud master. And this is basically for clients. If you're mixing things for your band, if you're mixing things to give to somebody else, if you're afraid they're going to compare it to a mix that's on the radio, on YouTube, whatever, a completed, finished mix, here's how to get really close to it, or here's how to finish your mix if you're not going to master. It's actually fairly simple, and it requires a compressor and a limiter. So here is the mix without anything on the master bus. Now you can see that it's not terribly loud, relatively speaking, but the peaks are actually loud. The peaks go pretty high. And this is important because we want to control them. So the first thing we're going to do is insert a compressor. And there may be compressors that you like that will sound better. I'm just going to use just the generic one here, just so you know that it doesn't matter. You can make this work regardless of the compressor that you use. So now let's listen, just with this compressor with the default settings. Now the first thing you notice is it decreased the level because there's a lot of compression. There's actually too much compression, so we're going to back that off and we're going to equalize the level a little bit. Okay, so now the level's about the same, but what we really want is hot levels, hot and loud levels. So this is where we're going to get our gain. Okay, so now we have a lot more gain, but if you take notice, we're also peaking into the red, which is never a good idea. Now take notice, I didn't change any of the settings, and usually what we want is a ratio that's very, very mild. We want it somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 1, 3 to 1, something like that. So let's have a listen before and after. Here's before the compressor. And with the compressor. Now one of the problems is, once again, we're peaking, and that's not a good thing as far as distortion is concerned. In a song like this where it's hard rock, sometimes you can get away with that, and it might actually add to it a little bit. But generally speaking, we want to stay away from that. So what you want is a limiter. So find a limiter, and in this case, there's usually some sort of a limiter that's in the native plugins. I'm going to use the precision limiter from Universal Audio. It's one of my favorites. Now, watch what happens. Now we have the level, and you can see we're just knocking off the peaks. Now, generally speaking, you can get this really loud if you crank it up, but it also sounds very compressed. So what we're going to do is get our level from the compressor, not from the limiter. Now you can see it really got loud there. We got a lot more relative level. We're not peaking. And this is something that now you can give to your friends, and they can compare it to some other songs, and it won't sound like it's a lot lower in level than the other ones. And that's kind of what you don't want. The 101 Mixing Tricks program has so many more killer tricks for effects, drums, instruments, and vocals that you'll never run out of ideas again when you're mixing. Check them out at 101mixtricks.com. Now, what happens if you don't have a limiter? Well, you can actually use another compressor and make this work. And let me show you how to do that. First of all, I'm going to bypass this. So, without the limiter, here's what happens. And you can see we're peaking there. So let's just put a second compressor limiter in. Now here's the secret. We want to make this act like a limiter. So we're going to crank up the ratio pretty high. And actually let's crank it up as high as it will go. It's 100-to-1 right now. And now the next secret is to bring the attack down as low as it will go. Now watch what happens. Okay, so that's way too much compression, which we don't want, so we're going to back off on it. And now what we're doing is we're just lopping off the peaks here, and you can see there's not much gain reduction that's happening. And just watch. And you can see our level is pretty hot. Now what we can do here is make it as hot as we can without it going over. And that's kind of what a mastering engineer does, actually. If we bypass everything, have a listen. We'll bypass both compressors. Now once again, you can actually squeeze this so it gets very compressed if you want, make it even louder still. And it will sound compressed. It will sound too compressed and it'll take all the life out of the song. So you want to be careful how much you compress it. Generally speaking, be kind to it. So don't hit it real hard, but you get your level from the first compressor. Now, just as a comparison, let's take these out of the circuit right now. I'll bypass both of them. And I want to play you what I'd normally use. And you can see I'm using quite a lot of things here. I'm using actually 3 compressors and the limiter. I can even bring my master fader up, which I had down pretty much before. And that's because I happen to like the sound of these compressors, but watch when I pull the SSL off for a second. See, it loses something. And also take notice, I'm not hitting it very hard. I'm barely touching it. Same thing with the Fairchild here. Once again, it's only a dB that I'm knocking off, and this is just rounding the bottom. And here's one of my favorites, it's the PSP. So you can see I have these 3 compressors that I'm using and just barely using them. Let's look at what happens here with the precision limiter. Once again, I'm only knocking off a dB and a half or so, and that's only on the peaks. So we're keeping the dynamic range, and yet we're making it really loud, and that's how to get a hot and loud mix. Okay, to summarize the hot and loud mix trick, the first thing you need to do is insert a compressor across the mix bus. It doesn't matter what kind of compressor, although some will sound better than others. Some just make a mix sound bigger and fatter, while others, they don't necessarily thin it out, but they won't sound as good. So experiment with the compressors that you have. The second thing is you only need to add a dB or 2 of compression. Although you can add more if you want. After you get to 5 or 6 dB, it begins to sound kind of small as a result. It sounds as if there's no dynamics which you're squeezing out of by increasing compression. So a dB or 2 is usually all that you need. You get your level from the makeup gain on the compressor. So turn that makeup gain up until you're somewhere around 0, and you'll see your peaks will be going into the red, but that's okay, because the next thing we're going to do is insert a limiter right after the compressor to control those peaks. And when we put the limiter in, we only have to set it to a ceiling of somewhere around 0.1 dB, and that way you're going to get really hot levels and you won't have any overs. So that's the hot and loud mix trick, number 14. This is the last free mixing trick video, but you can bring out the best in your mixes by signing up for my 101 Mixing Tricks coaching course. You can get a big discount if you act right now, but remember, it's going to end shortly and the price will soon return to normal. So sign up now and take your mixes to the next level.